with, of course, the Gilded Age. The Gilded Age is a nickname for a historical period in American history that goes from the 1860s to about the 1890s. I think they usually think it started in 1869 when Grant came in as president after Andrew Johnson didn't run for re-election. And the name Gilded Age came from a famous satirical novel that was written by Mark Twain and this other guy named Henry Dudley Warner that was published in 1873. What it was like a satire on politicians and speculators after the war and how they were taking advantage of the Civil War, post-Civil War period. There was a lot of cases where there was a lot of graft and corruption. Graft is like a form of bribery is what it is. A lot of bribery, a lot of corruption going on. The term gilded is a term that means that something that's attractive looking, but it's deceptive in appearance. Looks great, but seems kind of dirty because of all the corruption and bribery scandals that kind of took place. And there was a lot of people that were trying to make a lot of money during the Civil War and afterwards, including not just people that were politicians, but also people that were in like American industries, and stuff like that. They do, because of all the people, making money illegally like this, they call often the Gilded Age the era of good stealings. Like people were stealing money left and right. So the word graft is like a term that means like a bribery. It could be like where someone bribes a politician for a favor. And that's considered what they call graft. Graft and bribery and all this kind of things like corruption were very common under the president Ulysses S. Grant. He was president for 8 years from 1869 to 77. So here's like another slide here, of course. Yeah, Mark Twain. You've heard of Mark Twain. He's the guy that coined the term Gilded Age, of course. Mark Twain is considered one of the greatest American novelists in American history. He wrote Huckleberry Finn, and all of that. And real name was Samuel Clemens, but he went by of course, a pen name Mark Twain. And he's the one that kind of coined the name. And so that describes the whole corruption of the actual period. We'll also talk about corrupt politics as well. There's a lot of elections which are corrupt as well. One of the worst is the election of 1876. That was considered one of the worst elections in American history. And it was kind of scandalous. And there was later a compromise between the Democrats and the Republicans, which was called the Compromise of 1877. And the Democrats compromised with the Republicans to end Reconstruction in return for the Republicans keeping the White House or something like that. But that's later. There's a bunch of other stuff, too, you see on the bottom there that happened. Also, in the 1870s, they had like a real bad depression. So a lot of economic-wise, it wasn't that great. We read about it here and there. They have what they call grantism. Grantism became a term that they used to describe a lot of the corruption that took place under Grant's administration. If you remember correctly, Grant ran as a war hero. He was the 18th president of the United States. And if you remember correctly, he ran on that whole platform, which was waving the bloody shirt, where he basically said, hey, we won the Civil War. I was your general. You vote for me. Vote as you shot. Was the old saying. And so part of why he won was because of that. And I told you also because of the 15th Amendment, which gave African Americans the right to vote. Something like 500,000 African Americans voted for him, and that's also why he won as well. But Grant had all kinds of scandals that broke out under his administration, which you saw in the video, the whiskey ring scandal. I'll talk about later what they call the Belknap scandal. I have other slides on this later. They had they call it the Black Friday scandal, where these two financiers named Gold and Fisk tried to rip off the government by cornering the gold market. They had the Boss Tweed scandal, where the Tweed ring in New York City, Tammany Hall, ripped off the government also as well. So there are all kinds of numerous scandals One of the first we'll talk about later would be the Credit Mobile scandal, when they mentioned in the video too. They even involved two vice presidents were involved in it, actually. So we'll get to that in a little bit about that, all the different scandals. This is kind of just a PowerPoint slide showing all the different scandals. There's even the salary grab scandal too, which I think I've got a slide on that too that I've added also as well. Let me go ahead and first talk about the one scandal that was really the first one that came out. That was the one that was involving the Transcontinental Railroad. If you know about it, the Transcontinental Railroad was built in the 1860s. It was part of an act passed under Abraham Lincoln called the Pacific Railway Act in 1862. And it was an act that was designed to connect a railroad that would hook up the country from the east to the west coast, like all the way to California. And so Congress passed this act, and of course they gave out a bunch of loans to people they gave people money to build the actual railroad. Subsidies might be the better word to put it at. Very generous subsidies. And for companies that were actually building the track, they would give people $16,000 for every mile of track built. Okay. They would also give you $32,000 for every mile through hilly country, and another $48,000 for every mile in mountainous regions. So I can imagine they exaggerate about that. The railroad itself would be 1,800 miles long. It had two railroads that would connect eventually with each other, which were called the Central Pacific and the Union Pacific Railroad. The Central Pacific started in California, and it worked its way eastward. Started in Sacramento, and it worked its way eastward towards Utah. And then the Union Pacific was built from Omaha, Nebraska to Utah. So the two are going to, link up and basically and form this one railroad, which they eventually did. And eventually they met in Promontory Point, I believe, in 1869, and that basically completed the railroad. There's a famous picture of some of the workers that were involved in it. And not just Americans were involved, but they used a lot of immigrants were used to build it. And they even had a lot of Chinese labor, if you know about this, from China that came over, and they helped build the railroad and all that. So it's like the first Chinese that come over to America because of that being built. However, there was a big scandal over the building of the railroad. That was the only problem with it, if you study about it. And there was a scandal called the Credit Mobile scandal. And what happened was there was this phony construction company that had been created that was called that, which was owned by stockholders in it. And it involved a bunch of men in it that were famous. One was a man named Oakes Ames. If you want, I'll put him on the screen for you, Oakes Ames. And he was a Massachusetts politician. I'll just abbreviate Massachusetts, if you don't mind. And anyway, he was the director of the company. And he got a lot of people to buy stock in it, and including, believe it or not, members of Congress got involved. They started buying stock in the company, and they charged the U.S. government $94 million to build what is the Union Pacific Railroad, like the eastern half of it, but it only cost $44 million. So basically, they ripped off the government $50 million, which I don't know what that is today. It's got to be like $500 million or more today. They had bribed people in Congress and stuff like that. And of course, there was even a case where two of Grant's vice presidents, Schuyler Colfax, we mentioned that video, Henry Wilson, too, later his second VP, also had stock in the company, too, as well. And it was considered one of the worst scandals in American history, one of the largest, especially with the amount of money that was ripped off from the government. So they got this railroad built, but they ripped people off, in doing it. The Central Pacific did the same thing, too. They did the same thing. They ripped off the government, too. and made a lot of money. In fact, one of the guys that was the most wealthiest that made a lot of money off of the Central Pacific, which you may have heard. You heard of Leland Stanford? You've heard of him, huh? Leland Stanford. He's famous. Stanford. And Stanford was part of a group of railroad tycoons that were called the Big Four. There was like four of them involved in building the Central Pacific, and which was built from California to Utah. And they made millions of dollars off of government contracts and all that. And Stanford went on to, he's one who built Stanford University, you may have heard of, in California. So that's actually named after him. He actually created the actual university. So anyway, so that's like these big business guys kind of just ripping off the government, which that's quite common in the Gilded Age, and all that. What else scandal-wise? Yeah, they had this other, of course, scandal, the whiskey ring. This was where basically there was a group of distillers that took advantage of the government. They made a lot of money. And what happened was the Secretary of Treasury, his name was Benjamin Bristow. He discovered that a lot of these distillers weren't paying their taxes on whiskey that was being made. In fact, about 90% of the whiskey being made wasn't paying any taxes on it. And they were bribing public officials in Grant's government. And so that became a big scandal, and it was uncovered. And so all these distilleries, like throughout the country, were forced to eventually pay taxes on it. So anyway, I think Benjamin Bristow was like the only honest guy that was in the Treasury, part of the government under Grant. And all the other guys were all crooked, it seems like it. Oh, the salary grab. Oh, yeah, the salary grab was where Congress decided to give themselves a raise, like a 50% raise, basically, from $5,000 to $7,500, and it outraged the public. Like the American public was angry about it. That doesn't seem like much money, does it? Like, that's only $2,500. But you have to understand, in the 1870s, making $7,000, $8,000 was a lot of money. Money just wasn't worth much, back then. And some even got a retroactive check of $5,000 in raises and stuff like that. And that angered people, and so they had to withdraw it. Is what happened. So yeah, there's the whiskey ring. Orville Babcock, he was the guy that was, I think, supposedly that was involved in it as well. He was taking bribes, and so over $3 million in taxes was stolen from the federal government. And it began in St. Louis, various distilleries that were over there, and they were busted in 1875. Over 100 people were convicted of not paying their taxes. And you can see Orville Babcock was one of Grant's private secretaries. So he was kind of involved in it somehow. Then they had William Belknap. You've heard of him. He was the Secretary of War at the time under Grant. And he was involved in a scandal that was called the Belknap scandal. And what happened was he was accepting bribes from traders in the West at various forts that were in Indian territory. And it was uncovered by several people, I think, in the government and also in the military. There was a guy named George Armstrong Custer. You've heard of him. He was a famous American soldier, Indian fighter. He was one of the guys that ratted on him. And to get rid of Custer, if you know about it, they sent him westward to fight the Sioux. He later got killed at the Battle of Little Bighorn. But William Belknap was going to be impeached by Congress, but he decided to resign instead. So Grant accepted his resignation. But that was another scandal that was really bad. That was under Grant. There was so many scandals they had. It was real bad, Then they had the Black Friday scandal. That was another one too. That was where Jim Fisk and Jay Gould, he was these financiers on Wall Street, tried to corner the nation's gold market. They even tried to wine and dine Grant and his brother-in-law also as well, try to bribe him and all that to do it. And it ended up creating a financial panic in the country called the Panic of 1869. And Grant was forced to basically sell about 4 million in government gold. And they almost did it, but they got in big trouble for it. And it caused a panic. And then that led, they think, later to like a depression. Because if you know about the 1870s, was a period of like economic depression under Grant, and I think under Rutherford B. Hayes administration as well, which was often called in the 1870s the so-called Long Depression, because it lasted for like several years. So I think the video kind of showed that, how bad the Depression was, and there was a lack of jobs, and all that. Kind of like now with what happened with the virus. So we come to next, of course, Grant, of course, did run for a third term. So Grant served 2 terms as president, which were, like I said, very scandalous. That happened under his administration. I didn't talk about, there was one scandal. Where is it? Did I just skip it? I'm trying to look for it. There was one scandal. I don't know why it's not in there. Did it get taken out? For some reason, it's not in there. For some reason, but I had it in there, but it must have got deleted. Oh, there it is. No, that's not it. Oh, there it is. I found it. The Tweed ring scandal. I forgot about that one. I almost skipped it. But the Tweed ring scandal, that was a scandal where they had this guy named Boss Tweed, who was known as William Marcy Tweed. He controlled what is called Tammany Hall. And Tammany Hall was the Democratic Party machine that controlled New York City and its government. And Boss Tweed worked his way up to control the government. Tweed was actually a New York politician. He was in the New York Senate. Anyway, Tweed controlled a lot of the power in the government, and he used a lot of his votes. In exchange for votes from like immigrants, workers, politicians, and other people, he built a huge following where he could control the government, and he would, in favor, like he would give them like money and jobs. And over time, he formed this thing called the Tweed Ring. It was a group of corrupt politicians that were basically defrauding the government, basically through anything from what would be kickbacks, fraudulent contracts, bribes, any way to make millions. And they're not sure how much money Boss Tweed in his ring ripped off the government of New York City, but it may have been as much as $200 million. That might be in today's money, but it was a lot of money that they ripped people off. I'll give you an example of one that I've got that sometimes talk about. It was a New York courthouse that was supposed to be built in 1868, in New York City. It was going to cost $250,000 to build this courthouse. Well, 3 years later, in 1871, still hadn't been completed, so I hadn't finished it, and they had spent something like $8 million on it. A lot of the money went into their pockets, basically, is what it is. Well, this was found out by the district attorney of New York City, which was Samuel Tilden. We'll talk about Tilden later, but Tilden later runs for president in 1876 as a Democrat. And he uncovered what was going on, all the bribery, graft, and corruption. And so Tweed was eventually arrested, but he fled the country, if you know about it. They had to extradite him. I think they fled to Spain at one point. They brought him back. He served in jail where he actually died. So he was really a corrupt guy. And they made a lot of cartoons, I think, at that time, depicting him as this vulture, just descending on New York City and taking advantage of basically the city at the time. It's one of the worst scandals. I'd say that one and that other one, which was the Credit Mobile. Those two were pretty bad. But yeah, moving on to talk about the presidential election of 1876. Of course, yeah, you've got Of course, 1876 election, Grant's not running. You've got Rutherford B. Hayes running against Samuel Tilden, basically. And it was one of the closest elections in American history. I think the other one that was really close was the one in 2000, between Al Gore and George W. Bush. That was a pretty close one, too, as well. This one was very controversial because not really with the popular vote. Popular vote doesn't really count in presidential elections. It's all about the electoral vote. And the electoral vote was very close. It ended up being like 185 to 184 in the end. But when they had the election, after the results came in, Tilden who was a Democrat, had 184 votes. He was from New York. And then Rutherford B. Hayes was a Republican who was from Ohio. He got 165 electoral votes, but there were 4 states, which were Louisiana, Florida, Oregon, South Carolina, had disputed votes. Here's another slide on it, which is right here. There's the 2 men, Tilden on the right, of course, Rutherford B. Hayes on the left. The election took place on November 7, 1876. The Republicans, they didn't want to elect Grant again. There was talk of nominating Grant for a 3rd term, but all that corruption had kind of, thrown him out of the idea of that. And so the Republicans wanted more liberal voters and all that, and to unite the party. And so that's why they elected Rutherford B. Hayes of Ohio. And he was a war hero. I think he was somewhat of a pro-reform guy as well. And Tilden was seen as kind of a reformer too, because he had cracked down on the Tweed ring and as district attorney of New York City. And so he had gained a lot of fame from that. And they thought he might win the election because of that. So those are 2 guys that ran head to head, basically. And it was a very close election. But like I said, there were 4 states that had disputed electoral votes. Those 4, again, were Louisiana, Florida, South Carolina, and Oregon, which was, by the way, around 20-something electoral votes. I think it was actually 20. I think it was actually around 20 electoral votes, or 22 is what it was. I think it was 20. Actually 20 it was. Anyway, so what happened was they created this electoral commission. But Congress passed what they call Electoral Count Act of 1877. And what it did was it created a 15-member commission to decide who would win the presidency and get the electoral votes, basically. And if you know what happened was they picked 15 men, basically like this. I'll go through the 15 real quick here, but 8 of them were Republican and 7 were Democrat. Okay. And they picked 5 from the House of Representatives, 5 from the Senate, and 5 from the Supreme Court. But overall, 8 were Republican and 7 were Democrat. Well, you can imagine what happened. You can probably guess. The 8 Republicans voted for Hayes. And of course, the 7 Democrats voted for Tilden. Obviously, they voted basically on party rule pretty much. And so a compromise eventually occurred, if you know about it. And so basically, the 8 Republicans decided to give Rutherford B. Hayes all the electoral votes, and he won the presidency by 1 electoral vote, 185 to 184. They worked out an agreement with the Democrats, especially the ones in the southern states. And the agreement is that they would make Hayes president in return for ending Reconstruction, and they would withdraw troops from the South. And so the Compromise of 1877 is believed to be the main thing that they say, ended Reconstruction itself. So they had a question on there, who was going to protect African Americans after that, after they left? Well, they didn't. Nobody was. So a lot of the Southern Democrats took advantage of that, white Southern Democrats. And I told you how later they started passing all these segregation laws to disenfranchise African Americans. And they redeemed themselves and basically took over and took control of the New South afterwards. So, like I said, a lot of people in the North and out West didn't really care that much about the South because they were in a depression, for one thing. And then people wanted to build up the country industry-wise. And then also they were trying to expand westward. A lot of people were leaving anyway, the South and the North, to go west. And so people didn't really care about Reconstruction and about fixing things in the South, which that wouldn't happen until really the next century. Kind of a sad thing with that. But that's basically what the compromise was. There's some other things too. Of course, it did too. Hayes had to put a Southerner in his cabinet. That was another thing. The federal government also had to spend money rebuilding the South, which they did do that later. Even the Morrill Act, as an example, would create universities in the South as examples, of course. And so there's just different things that they'll do later where the South gets rebuilt, after the war. But that's going to take a while for that to happen. Hayes, by the way, was not very popular as president. In fact, his whole I think time he was in power, he was just trying to see himself as being legitimate or not. All the Democrats thought he was fraudulent as a president because he had won because of that electoral commission, and they called him nicknames. They called Rutherford B. Hayes. They called him his fraudulency, or his old 8 to 7 is what they called him. And one of the things that happened under Rutherford B. Hayes was that the Republicans split into two groups that were called the stalwarts and then the half-breeds that they had right here. Yeah, stalwarts and half-breeds. I think I've got a slide on this, which is right here. Stalwarts were Republicans that wanted to see the whole spoil system stay in power, like all the corruption and stuff that was going on. They were kind of these old guard Republicans, and they didn't want to make any changes, to the government and what was going on. Half-breeds were Republicans that wanted reforms to try to change the country, civil service reform and other reforms to prevent corruption in government, etc. And so stalwarts were basically these old guard Republicans, and half-breeds were these reform-minded Republicans. So that's the differences between the two sides. And Chester Arthur was a stalwart. He would be vice president under James Garfield. Some other guys, James Blaine, who would later run for president, was a half-breed. Roscoe Conkling was also a stalwart, as an example. And Garfield, James Garfield, of course, he ran for president in 1880. Garfield, get for my notes on that. Garfield was from Ohio, and he had been a war hero, Civil War hero. And they picked him because he was kind of seen as a reformer. He was a half-breed, basically. And he would get elected on a ticket which included Garfield plus Chester Arthur, who I told you was a stalwart who ran with him. And it was kind of a compromise ticket with those two guys running side by side. They ran against a Democrat who was General Winfield S. Hancock of Pennsylvania. Hancock was, I think I've got a slide on that down here, don't I? I don't think I've got, yeah, there's Garfield right there. There's Hancock. But Garfield was more of a dark horse type figure. And then Winfield Scott was a big war hero. And he had been at Gettysburg. They ran on different campaigns. Like Garfield ran on the ideas to reform the government, civil service reform, and things like that. And then Winfield Hancock ran on like the tariff issue and things like that as an example. And Republicans were in favor of business and protective tariffs, and Winfield Hancock wanted to lower tariffs, which was kind of a controversial story, like, that was going on at the time. Depends on which side you're on politically. Republicans wanted high tariffs, Democrats wanted lower tariffs, especially in the South, because it protected farmers and Southerners with various businesses that they had. There's Chester Arthur on the right, of course, the VP. He would later, of course, be the 21st president of the United States. And Winfield Hancock, of course, the guy he ran against, was also called Hancock the Superb because he had been a Civil War hero at Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. So in the election, Garfield won. Oh, by the way, it was one of the closest elections, popular vote-wise, in history. You can see Garfield barely won the election. 4,454,000, and the other guy had 4,444,000. Look at that. That's like only just like he won by about, it's like 500 something votes. That's crazy. Look at that. That's how close that is. 500 and some votes. Crazy. That's nuts. But anyway, but of course it doesn't matter because electoral college is the only thing that really matters. But that's interesting about the popular vote being real close there. But you can see how the South, is voting all Democrat. I don't know if you see that or not. There's a certain term they use for that. I don't know if you've heard of that, but they start calling that the solid South. The solid South, as they call it sometimes. Like from this election, I think all the way up to like the 1960s, the South votes all Democrat, for a long, long time. That won't change until Richard Nixon and Ronald Reagan come in. And they kind of flipped the states being Republican. And now a lot of the southern states are more Republican now today in the South. So yeah, Garfield got elected. However, if you know about Garfield, he wasn't in power very long. He was only in power 6 months, about 4 months into his presidency. He got shot by this man named Charles Guiteau. Charles Guiteau. And in September of 1881, of course, Garfield would die. But on July, I believe it's July 2nd is the date, is when he got shot. He was at a train station getting ready to go on vacation somewhere in Washington, D.C., and this disgruntled government seeker shot him in the back with a pistol, a revolver. And so for about 2 months or so, Garfield was in the hospital. And in fact, eventually he got an infection from the bullet wound and died. But Garfield took a while to die, a couple months. He didn't die until September. I think the date you saw there when he died, September 9th, 1881, was actually the assassination date when Garfield dies. And so Garfield dies because of being shot by Guiteau. And so that allows Garfield to come in and basically take over. So Garfield comes in, Arthur comes in, he's president, afterwards. So yeah, here's another slide on it, of course. Yeah, he did shoot Garfield at point blank range twice, basically. But of course, it didn't kill him. It just severely wounded him and all of that. And it was all because of politics. Also, Guiteau was supposedly some kind of disgruntled government seeker. He wanted to have some kind of consulship job or something somewhere overseas, but they wouldn't give it to him. And that's why they say he shot Garfield. So that Arthur would come in. I guess maybe he thought Arthur would get him a job or something after he shot that guy. It's kind of stupid. Here's some interesting facts, of course, about the assassin. He lived about almost 3 months after he was shot. Garfield. In the attempt to find the bullet, they actually create a 23-inch gash in the president's stomach trying to find it, and they think that's what killed him later. So they created an infection. Yeah, he's attacked while attempting to take a vacation to go see his wife, actually, who I think he had just got married. They couldn't get the bullet out. By the way, it was stuck in him. Couldn't find it for some reason inside of, which also probably led to the infection. They think he may have died of a heart attack, actually, Garfield, and not really from the bullet. One of the big things that, of course, happened after Garfield was assassinated, they created the Civil Reform Act of 1883, also called the Pendleton Act, as it was dubbed. And what it did was it did several things. First of all, it created some kind of civil service commission base that was created. Also, with civil service, if you wanted to be in the government, you had to take open and competitive exams and all this. So it was bipartisan. It was open to anybody that could, Republican or Democrat. Also, another thing they did too, if you were a federal employee, you could not give money like campaign contributions to any political party. Still can't because of that act. So it was either called either one, Civil Service Reform Act or the Pendleton Act. That was one of the things that was interesting about Trust Author. Author tended to be kind of somewhat reform-minded, even though he was originally a stalwart as a whole. Another thing they did, too, they later would pass an act that was called the Presidential Succession Act of 1886. This will be a little later, but they would eventually create that because of the Lincoln and Garfield assassinations. And what it said was that the order of succession of who would become president would be president, vice president, secretary of state, and secretary of the treasury. This was a later bill that was passed under Grover Cleveland. But if the president, vice president, and secretary of state would get killed or whatever, that's kind of the order it would go, pretty much. So president dies, it would go to the vice president. President and vice president are both dead, go to the secretary of state. Of course, currently it's not like that anymore. Now, of course, the succession is now president, vice president, and speaker of the House. Yeah, I think the president pro temp of the Senate would get it, is how they do it. And then the secretary of state is now the order. I think that's because of the 25th Amendment, I believe, is the one that, of course, did that later. All right, then you had the 1884 election. Arthur wanted to run for election, but they wouldn't let him. And so the election in 1884 was between the Republican James G. Blaine. That was the guy they showed in the video that was talking to Hayes. And then Grover Cleveland was the Democrat that ran. I think Blaine was from New York. And then the other guy, Cleveland, was from Ohio. And if you know much about the 1884 election, it was considered one of the dirtiest elections in American history. Very, very dirty. Let me move this over here so you can see that. And so we got James Blaine on one side running. And Cleveland was a reformer, but both sides had like problems, if you know about it. Blaine had a problem with various things under him. Blaine was got in trouble for corruption under his. I think in was it New York? I believe it was. Under Blaine, and he had been taking like money from like the railroad barons into his pocket, and so there were people called mugwumps that broke away that were Republicans, and they supported Grover Cleveland for president, is what they did. So part of why Grover Cleveland would win the presidency in the Democrats in 1884 was because a lot of Republicans broke away from their party because of, corruption that was still in the party. I guess the old stalwarts that were there. And Blaine was in New York. Anyway, and Grover Cleveland was in Ohio and all that. But anyway, there was also this other thing where there was a Republican clergyman that had called Democrats the party of rum, Romanism, and rebellion. That's because of the Irish, if you know about that. There were a lot of that voted Democrat a lot in New York. And Blaine got in trouble for that a lot. And so that was something that caused it and allowed eventually Cleveland to win the election because of all these Republicans that broke away from Blaine and supported him and all that. And then there was this other case where they ridiculed Grover Cleveland because he had a child out of wedlock. He had an illegitimate, I think it was a son, that people found out about during the election. And so the Republicans started, making fun of him, that he's got this illegitimate kid and all that. And so later on, when Cleveland won the election, the Democrats had this thing that they said or whatever, which was "Ma, where's my pa?" That was originally what the Republicans said to Cleveland, joking about this illegitimate son, and the Democrats replied with, "He's going to the White House, ha ha ha." And so anyway, the election, Blaine versus Cleveland. Cleveland would win, of course, become the 22nd president of the United States. That election wasn't as close, I guess, with that one, but you can see the solid South still there, pretty much voting as a whole. Cleveland was a reformer. They called him Grover the Good, and supported by the mugwumps Republicans. Cleveland is one of these presidents that's interesting. He served 2 terms, but out of secession, if you know about this. Basically, he served his first term, of course, you can see 85 to 89, and then he also served a second term later, 1893 to 97. So he's the only president to serve 2 terms, but not in order, like back to back, which is interesting. Cleveland, like I said, was a reformer. He is famous for vetoing a lot of bills like Congress. In fact, they say Cleveland vetoed more bills from Congress than any other president before him. It's amazing, like way more. So bills that were going to, waste the taxpayers' money. He is famous for having, like, after he, I think, went out of office, like the first term I know, he had a surplus that he actually had. Later, we'll talk about some of these. Like, I won't talk about it now, but he was known for the Dawes Act and the Interstate Commerce Act, which the Dawes Act was an act created for developing the West, and it was supposed to aid, like, the Native American Indians. And the Interstate Commerce Act was an act that was developed to regulate interstate commerce throughout the country. But I'll talk about that later a little bit. He was known for lowering the tariff. That's one thing they always talk about under his administration, which the Republicans didn't like too much because, Democrats favored lower tariffs. They think that's maybe why he lost the election in 1888, because he ran for re-election against Benjamin Harrison, who was Republican. He lost to him in that election. I don't know if I'm going to talk much about Harrison as much overall. But on a few other things that happened, which were under Harrison and Cleveland that were famous. Other type of domestic legislation they passed too as well. They did reduce a lot of the under when Benjamin Harrison came in, he kind of reversed things, and they started spending more money. And a lot of it was on frivolous, like pensions. I don't know if you know much about this, but they had this pension grab thing that happened in the 1880s and 90s. That happened, and a lot of people, like ex-soldiers that were like Union side and Confederate side, basically got pensions. The Pension Act of 1890 was passed. And that led to what they call the $1 billion Congress. Benjamin Harris defeated Grover Cleveland in the 1888 presidential election. Harrison was a grandson of William Henry Harrison, who had been a previous president in the early 1800s. And his Congress was very expensive. They had the first $1 billion budget in history ever. And they spent a lot of money. Like examples, they raised the tariff. Like it was the so-called McKinley tariff I'll talk about later, where they raised tariffs again. They increased Civil War pensions a lot to various veterans on both sides in the conflict, Confederate and Union side. There were some positive things, like the Sherman Antitrust Act was one of the things, I guess, positive-wise that Harrison was known for later as President of the United States, where they passed this Antitrust Act to try and crack down on monopolies in the industries in big business. And I think it lacked some teeth initially. There was also a deal where they tried to Sherman Civil Purchase Act. I'll talk about that later, but there was a big debate about money too, about should they increase paper money or should they have silver currency, and that becomes an issue later, which we'll talk about when I get to the late 1890s. Not now. We'll talk about it later about that. But yeah, like with these pension grabs, they had all these different organizations that did this. Like they had the GAR. I don't know if you ever heard of them. But they were called the Grand Army of the Republic, which was this fraternal organization of ex-Union soldiers in the North that had fought in the war. And they basically got the federal government to give either them pensions or their descendants pensions, like their children basically too. Like their sons and daughters could even get some of the money as well, or wives. The wives, if you were like a widow or whatever, you could get money. I think there was one of my uncles who fought for the Confederacy in Mississippi. His wife got a pension. I found out about this through some genealogy research. Crazy. But she got some kind of pension out of this because he had fought in the war and all that. And anyway, they also set up memorials everywhere. Like in the North, they had these, Union memorials for the northern side. And the Confederate also built some too as well. Then the sons of Confederate veterans, the daughters of Confederate veterans, they also did the same thing as well. Of course, some people think that some of this stuff is to do with white supremacy later, like with the building of all these statues that they're tearing down now. But a lot of it was done more or less to honor the soldiers that had fought in the war at the time. They were still alive. A lot of the soldiers were still alive, that fought in the war. And they built, memorial parks and, of course, battlefield parks that they have still today and all that. So that's pretty much it about, that lecture on all the corruption and the politics, at the time, which is really, really bad, in the late 19th century. I guess I'll spend a little time reviewing also as well. If you want real quick, I can review real quick. If you have any questions about this lecture, let me know later about it. You can send me, like I said, comments, questions through YouTube about the lecture. Let me go ahead and just review real quick about what we covered today. And that's it, because we did spend a lot of time showing like videos today and announcements and things like that. But yeah, so let me go ahead and go through review real quick. So the Gilded Age, what was that? The Gilded Age was the nickname for the political period from Grant's administration in the 1860s, 1869 to the 1890s. And it was a period known for political corruption, a lot of economic corruption in the government and in the state. And it was known for having a lot of graft, corruption, bribery, and it was nicknamed for a book by Mark Twain that was called that. And of course, the period was called also the era of good stealings. A lot of the corruption occurred under Grant and other presidents, but Grant's administration was one of the darkest where a lot of this corruption happened. Credit Mobile, remember, was a scandal involving the Transcontinental Railroad, which was built in the 1860s. That was that railroad to link up the Central and Union Pacific railroads, which would connect all the way to California. It was part of the Pacific Railway Act passed under Lincoln's administration in 1862. And it was the first railroad that linked the East Coast with the West Coast. The two railroads, again, of course, were the Union Pacific, which was built from Omaha, Nebraska to Utah, and the Central Pacific, which was built from California, where Sacramento is, to Utah. Oakes Ames was the guy that ran it. The Credit Mobile's, kind of a bogus company there that built the Union Pacific. They ripped off the government. Of course, a lot of money, which I think I told you was like $50 million, I think it was. Salary grab, if you remember correctly, was that deal where the Congress tried to give themselves a raise, 50% raise, and it was a scandal. Whiskey Ring was a scandal where the whiskey distillers in the United States weren't paying their taxes on distilled liquor, and Benjamin Bristow, he was a Treasury Secretary, figured it out, and so they were forced to pay all their tax they owed. William Belknap, if you remember correctly, Secretary of War, was caught taking bribes from various traders out in the West, and he was forced to resign from power. So all kinds of scandals happened under Grant. I think that's most of them, but I think there might have been, there was another one I had that also had. Boss Tweed scandal, of course. Tweed Ring, of course, was another scandal where Tweed and his other politicians and so on were controlling Tammany Hall, which was the Democratic political machine of New York City. They ripped off the government there through fraudulent contracts, kickbacks, briberies, taking people's money for votes and stuff like that. It became a big scandal. Samuel Tilden, as you know, cracked down on it, and he was arrested and thrown in jail. They stole millions. We talked about, I don't know, for some reason it's not in there. Where's the other thing? I don't have it in there for some reason. Oh, 1876, forgot about that. It's not in there for some reason. Must have left it out. I'll add that later. But don't forget the presidential election in 1876. Rutherford B. Hayes, Republican, defeated Samuel Tilden. And I told you it was the closest election in American history, one of the closest. And it was a disputed election, if you remember correctly, where 20 electoral votes were controlled by Louisiana, Florida, South Carolina, and Oregon. And there was a debate about who should get them. And so they created this electoral commission to figure out who should get the votes, electoral votes. And you remember correctly, the Democrats compromised and they let Hayes become president in exchange for Reconstruction ending in the South. So those 8 commissioners that were Republican voted in favor of Hayes. The 7 Democrats voted in favor of Tilden. And so, as you know, Hayes won 185 to 184 in electoral votes, which was one of the closest in American history. And I'll have that. I'm going to add that in there. For some reason, it's missing. I'll put that in the review thing later. Then Garfield, of course, ran for president. Remember, he was only in power like 6 months or so. He was shot by Charles Guiteau. You saw in that video. It was insane. He was crazy. Gateau, something wrong with him mentally. And so because Garfield got shot and died in September of 1881, Chester Arthur became president, and he ended up becoming this reformer that eventually passed reforms under his administration. He was mostly known for the Pendleton Civil Service Act, which reformed federal civil service. And I told you also that if you were a federal employee, you couldn't give money to any campaign anymore, which I guess they had done before. So Cleveland got elected in the 1884 election. I think we talked about that. Cleveland was the first Democrat president to be elected since, by the way, not Grover Cleveland, since James Buchanan. Buchanan was the last Democrat to hold the office, White House. So what kind of election was it? I told you it was a dirty election, that election that was there. And a lot of mudslinging. They had the so-called mugwumps that broke away from James Blaine because he had insulted various Democrats that were Irish because they were Catholic and all that and drank alcohol. And so they broke away and supported him. And if you remember correctly, the Republicans made fun of Cleveland because he had an illegitimate son and all that. And so just nasty, mudslinging on both sides. And Cleveland won the election. But remember, he served 2 terms, but he lost to Benjamin Harrison in 1888. Harrison was only like a 1-term president. And then Cleveland would serve a 2nd term later, not consecutively. I told you Benjamin Harrison, which I don't have that in there either. I don't know why. But Harrison was known for his $1 billion Congress, which was the first to spend $1 billion budget-wise. They spent a lot of money on different things, including, I told you, all these Civil War pensions that they put on everybody, raised all the tariffs. But they were known for some positive things, such as the first anti-trust act or anti-monopoly act passed called the Sherman Antitrust Act. I'll talk about that later, about that. I didn't talk about the public morality stuff too, which they tried to ban alcohol, I think, around that time because the temperance movement gets started, but they were never able to really make it legal as a whole. So I'm not going to spend much time on politics in this period, of history, American history, but I am going to be moving on to talk about the Old West coming up. This is kind of a long little lecture today, looks like it, but I did spend a lot with videos and reviewing today. But next week on Tuesday and probably into Thursday, I'm going to talk about the Old West. I'll probably have some kind of assignments coming up. I know I'm going to have a new Canvas quiz coming up next week, Tuesday, which will probably be on the Gilded Age, likely. The period we're kind of talking about right here. And then I might have a video assignment too coming up, which I think it's probably going to be on the Old West, likely. So I'll talk about that next week. But for now, what y'all need to do upcoming, for next week is y'all need to finish that Canvas quiz number 1 on Reconstruction. So y'all need to finish that. And y'all need to go back, look at the lectures on that, and complete that because that is due, you remember correctly, next Tuesday, which is September 8th. So I am sending out, notices, emails about that, about trying to get you to finish that up. So try to get that done for me for that so we can move into next week. So I don't want you to get behind and all that, with those kind of assignments. Okay, so if anybody else has any other questions, like I said, let me know. I guess through YouTube. Remember, you do get bonus points for asking me comments, questions during the semester on each lecture overall. And like I said, reminders about about the research paper. Send me topics. I think I need more people I don't think everybody sent me information about that, about what research topic you want to do for your paper, but send that to me as soon as you can. Just email it to me, let me know so I can decide if it's proper for you to use that topic or not. Because I've had somewhere somebody sent me something, but it seemed like it was more like European or some other history and not really truly American. So try to stick to American history for whatever research topic you're going to pick. Also, if you're interested, again, one more time, Veterans Oral History Project, let me know about that also as well. So that's it for today. Hope y'all have a good afternoon and all that. Of course, Labor Day weekend coming up. Monday, we don't have classes, I guess. I'm not having classes that day, I know. But I may send out some announcements to you about stuff coming up next week, like for Tuesday. So y'all have a good weekend coming up. And like I said, send me comments, questions about this lecture or previous lectures that I've got before. So y'all take care. And I'll see y'all later. Okay? So have a good weekend. Long weekend too, huh?
You too.
Take care.